Hello and welcome once again to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth Series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to welcome you all with us today, and also a pleasure to welcome four distinguished gentlemen who are officials of the Bennington County Regional Commission, the Windham Regional Commission, the Brattleboro Development Corporation, and the Bennington Industrial Corporation. Real pleasure to have with us today Bill Colvin, who is the director of the Bennington County Industrial Corporation, Jim Sullivan, the executive director of the Bennington County Regional Commission, Chris Campany of the Windham Regional Commission, and Adam Grinold of the Brattleboro Development Corporation. Jim, why don't we start with you, since you're here in the same county.
Sure. So, as far as what we've been doing at the Regional Commission, a lot of it is we've really been kind of assimilating and getting information out to municipal governments and organizations, just on what needs to happen and how things can happen and how to manage and structure their activities going forward. So a lot of it's been kind of being a clearinghouse for information and making sure that is accessible and available to people. We've been also working with a number of organizations to try to coordinate, response and volunteer activities and things like that. So agencies and organizations that need assistance, we've been trying to help, really working a lot with Bennington College to try to coordinate that assistance. And one of the things that I think often gets overlooked because of the fact that we are in a real serious public health crisis and a burgeoning economic crisis is the fact that all this other local and regional and state business has to keep going on too. And so a lot of what we're doing is, trying to figure out and maintain our existing programs. Solid waste management, we do that. The trash needs to get picked up and things need to keep going on, and transportation planning and project management and helping towns move ahead with their keep their town plans and things on schedule. So a lot of it is, what we've always done, but, trying to figure out new ways to do it with, some of the staff and resource constraints that we're all faced with now.
And why don't we hop across the mountain there to Windham, and Chris, tell us a little bit what's been going on over on your side of the mountain there.
So we're doing basically the same things that Jim laid out. Each of the regional commissions has some different tasks. I think it is important that we're trying to help towns continue their activities and the activities that we support. Now, in our case, we're not managing the solid waste management district, but we are trying to help towns keep their business up to the best that they can. The regional commissions engaged with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns to try to help get extension on the universe of town deadlines, so that they have some leeway during the state of emergency. We also work with them with the legislature to change the open meeting law rules so that you no longer had to have a physical meeting location required. One of the things that we did, and I'm modeling it after what was done in Northeast Kingdom, was work with some groups here in the Brattleboro area to actually develop a region-wide comprehensive resource guide, kind of a one-stop shop for people who are needing services or needing information. And so we're hosting that on our website. We're also beginning to have conversations with human service organizations about what the long-term recovery needs are going to look like. Now, our role is primarily with towns, but after Irene, we helped stand up a long-term recovery committee to get people back at homes that they had lost to the flooding. We don't know exactly what that scenario is going to look like at the end of this pandemic and the lifting of the state of emergency, but we just want to renew those connections, and that'll be in collaboration with Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. Has done a great job standing up and directly working with businesses and helping answer questions around, for employers and employees. And so ultimately we'll want to link into that work also the needs of individuals, because there are going to be people struggling to pay rent, pay mortgages. Just, we're really just seeing the beginning of all this. And so what does long-term recovery look like on that kind of basic human needs side of things? And we're not necessarily taking a lead there, we're just basically playing a facilitating role.
All right. And while we're over in Windham County, let's hear from you, Adam. How are things been looking from the perspective of the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation?
Well, I think to answer the first question, sort of what's been happening, the BDCC, similar to both Chris and Jim, have been focused on ensuring that the region, the employers, the municipalities, and the various partners in the economy have timely, accurate, and actionable information. In the early days of this, everyone was sort of scrambling and really just looking for some way to understand where they were, for the ground to stop moving. And as information coming from the federal government was evolving, people really just wanted to understand what was the lifeline that they could grab onto. So we really focused on creating a weekly webinar for businesses to join, really trying to bring in both the state and federal partners to participate in those calls. So bringing folks like the Commissioner of Labor, Mike Harrington, to be able to speak to the UI piece of that, federal delegation representatives who were able to speak to what was happening in Washington. And I don't think that happens in a lot of states, I suspect, where a multitude of very small business owners can get on a call, hear firsthand from Senator Leahy or Senator Sanders or Congressman Welch's team exactly what's happening almost up to the hour in the discussions on how federal resources will come to the state. So, we saw that happen not just in this region in Bennington and Windham, but across the state. And it's been a real benefit. And I think one of the results is that we see Vermont being in the top 5 for the number of the states with the most per capita that were able to draw down from the PPP program. And I think that's a direct link to the ability for organizations like you have on today and across the state to be able to connect to those local, regional employers and business owners and nonprofits and make that connection directly to the federal government. That seamless communication really put people in a position to be able to capitalize on that opportunity. We're looking forward to more funding. We know there's a long list of people who didn't get into that, and we're really hopeful for that. One last point I'll make is, what we're really mindful of right now is those early days of getting that actionable, accurate, and timely information. Is that as a region, as an organization, that we have to pop our heads out of the weeds and remember that we have a bigger vision that we have to do. It's not just the emergent reaction to this, but it's the continued vision of what we're here to do. And that's to make sure we're bringing those resources to our key stakeholders and constituents that they're going to need continued access to. So we've got to be looking months down the line right now. And that's really hard to do as you're still trying to solve immediate challenges. But plenty of work to do, that's for sure.
Well, let's loop back around to Bennington County. And Bill Colvin, you wear 2 hats, actually, not only heading the Bennington County Industrial Corporation, but also Assistant Director at the Bennington County Regional Commission. So you've been busy.
Thanks, Andrew. And as Jim and Chris and Adam pointed out, much of our work has been focused on trying to push out timely, accurate information in as many ways as possible. So we have a special COVID-19 related website with a whole host of resources. It's listed, it's updated multiple times a day. I think that's common among the organizations on this call. We have a newsletter blast going out to our business community and partners with, again, the information that Adam referenced. And, we've been directly engaged with now about 140 businesses over the past 3+ weeks. As this has emerged. And really, I think Adam has mentioned similarly, the engagements generally fall into one or more of three categories. Questions around kind of initially the compliance with the executive orders and what was essential businesses versus not. And again, you know, some of those questions coming in today with the changes announced on Friday by the governor, and kind of linking folks with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development and the resources they put together to help businesses identify essential status. So that was one category. Unemployment insurance, and, you know, particularly for businesses, that generally fell into categories of kind of newly eligible entities such as self-employed, independent contractors, gig economy workers. What's that mean for us? How do we access it? So trying to get folks accurate information there. And then of course around funding, you know, the SBA programs that Adam mentioned, the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Impact Disaster Loan Program, which again, as Adam just noted, we hope to have refunded perhaps as early as today with new federal money. But a lot of questions around those and how they interplay, and trying to get that information out to businesses. And then really kind of new information like is really popping up, like this new U.S. Chamber of Commerce grant that popped up over the weekend for small businesses, just trying to stay on top of those resources. You know, so that's been a busy part of the work for sure. Trying to communicate, trying to understand and track communications that are happening at the state level has been important. So monitoring the governor's press conferences. There are Tuesday and Thursday calls coming out at the Agency of Commerce with all of the partners that Adam mentioned, which is producing some pretty good information and opportunity to clarify items with the state and federal partners. One other element, actually two other elements, but one is the work that the RDCs as a whole have been doing. And Adam is the chair of the RDCs of Vermont, the 12 regional development corporations. And Adam's been pulling us together regularly to kind of compare notes on what's happening in the regions. And I think perhaps even more importantly, identify where the shortfalls in the response have been. So the RDCs as a whole put together a letter that went out to the federal delegation, identifying the gaps that were emerging in the response up front. So that's been a part of the work. And then finally, as Adam noted, we're already beginning to pivot to stabilization and recovery long-term. So been engagements already with both FEMA and the Economic Development Administration about resources that might be available to assist both all municipalities, individuals, and our businesses going forward. We expect, I think at the Planning Commission and certainly at the Regional Development Corporations, that this is going to be our work for the foreseeable future. You know, helping folks dig out of what comes next and trying to navigate that process.
So what do you all see as some of the main lessons of this pandemic? Are there any kind of lessons we're drawing from this experience that say, hey, you know, we've really got to fix this area or this problem or this capacity issue sooner rather than later?
Before this, we already had a regional broadband project underway. But I think this whole event has just underscored that broadband access is a necessity, not something optional, even though federal policy has said that, you know, it shouldn't be treated as a necessity as we have in the past, like with electricity or phone. But clearly it's an absolute necessity now. And another piece of that is we need to be ready, I think, for potential growth in the wake of this. I think all of exurban and urban and rural Northeast may be looking at people wanting to move elsewhere, away from more densely populated areas. I experienced this when I was Deputy Commissioner of Planning for Orange County, New York, in the wake of 9/11. We saw a surge of population. And frankly, we don't have the infrastructure in a lot of our communities to support the compact settlement that we've all been planning for. We've been planning for it, but we haven't actually been putting the infrastructure in place to support it. So the path of least resistance is Class 3 town roads. But we need to, as opposed to kind of retreating from those things right now, we really need to, I think, double down on the investment in infrastructure at a time. But it may be challenging to say, you know, well, do we have the money for that? Hopefully the federal government will step up. But this isn't the time to retreat from those kinds of investments. I think we really need to double down and make those investments so that what we've said needs to happen will actually happen.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. And I think that, one of the immediate and obvious lessons is that as we do our emergency management planning going forward, this is obviously brought front and center that we really need to consider these types of emergencies. I think that we all were pretty heavily focused, rightly so, on flooding and natural disasters after Irene. But obviously, this type of incident has such profound impacts on everybody's lives and our economies that we need to consider what those types of responses need to be, and to get those into our plans. And definitely backing up what Chris said, to make sure that our plans and implementation measures behind those plans are set up so that municipalities can guide and direct growth and development in the most positive and appropriate way. And just as a final note on that, making sure that we have the resources to support that. One of the things that I think that we're I'm keeping an eye on, I think everybody is what's going to happen to state and local government budgets, because those are the state agencies and the regional planning and development corporations and the local governments need those resources to help make sure that we can respond effectively to this and to carry on critical, essential, existing programs. And those budgets are taking right now, a massive hit. And so a lot of discussion today about the new CARES Act 3 or 4 or whatever number we're on, and it not including support for state and local government. And it's hopefully the next round comes along pretty quickly and recognizes that need.
One thing in economic development we often will use as sort of a badge of honor is how many jobs we've helped create, how many businesses we've supported as they create those jobs. It's not very often that we can talk with pride about helping to close businesses or lose jobs. And as we go through this process right now, we know that we're going to lose a significant number of our employers and of our businesses. So it's how do we support those folks through that time in a way that retains their entrepreneurial spirit, that keeps those folks ready to do their next endeavor. So we've been using the term courage to close. So how do we assist businesses in understanding what is that right moment? And again, our role is not to necessarily advise, it's to help get them information and tools to understand and analyze their current position. And this is a really, really difficult subject for many people to even hear us speak about. But what we know is that we don't want people taking on more debt than they can take on. So as we start to look forward and we say, okay, if you are a restaurant and you are going to open, let's make sure you're thinking about the specific details. How will you open? And, if you're a restaurant that was, your business model is premised on square footage and number of tables and number of turns per night, and you have to take half of your tables out, does your model even work to pay your bills and to create a profit? And if you don't have a profit, how long can you get some resources in the door to operate at a loss until you're able to get to profit? And is that worth it? And that is an analysis that every business in their own way or own fashion is going to have to go through. And that is not an easy topic, but it's one in which people will need assistance to do. The other sort of takeaway that I have here is that we operate so lean as a country. So we're telling our hospitals that you can't store 2,000 masks over there. You need to just order them on a monthly or weekly basis. You can't have cash sitting there for the rainy day fund. So our state, our municipal, our institutions, our organizations, and our businesses are on such a thin margin that they don't have the ability to take a punch like this. So as we come out of this, how do we change that? What do we learn from this? How do we apply that? And how do we make sure that we're ready for the next punch?
And I would just add briefly, and I think people have kind of hit all of the key points, but I think we have learned, I think simultaneously, both how at risk our business community is in the region and how resilient, if that makes sense. And let me explain how I think it does. As Adam mentioned, everybody's running very lean, and we know that coming out the back end of this, our business community is going to look different than it did at the outset. So obviously we're focused on how do we support those transitions. We also have had a number of businesses that have quickly pivoted to begin, immediate response and production of personal protective equipment and other items of need in this time, and literally almost overnight shifted their business model and production capabilities. So we know that spirit is there, and we need to figure out ways to support it the best way that we can. I think everybody on this call was involved in some way post Irene, which has been mentioned, and may recall that we brought in flood recovery officers into Southern Vermont to work one-on-one with businesses and provide additional capacity and counseling through the challenging decisions that Adam referenced. And certainly we're hoping to have some type of model where we can provide not only the ongoing capacity we have to our business community, but look to expand that for the foreseeable future.
Well, pre-pandemic, we were all worried about demographics and the aging of Vermont and all of that, particularly here in Southern Vermont. That's been a big issue and talking point. I read an article in the New York Times over the weekend. It kind of touched on this point that crowded cities may seem less attractive places to live. People may start to look at a place like Vermont as somewhat more attractive than it might have seemed. That wasn't the way any of us anticipated growing the population of Vermont, but is there any thought that that might be some sort of byproduct out of all of this?
There was an interesting report, I forget if it was a Washington Post or New York Times, that had, actually it was in City Lab, they had reported on research that showed where people move as a result of floods and other things, other natural events. But, we've also been talking about migration related to climate change, especially as the coastal Northeast has to retreat inland just because of rising sea level, even just, sunny day flooding. And I'll be interested to see to what extent, and we saw this with New Orleans post Katrina, to what extent the second homeowners who retreated up here, not only with their pets, but also their house plants. So a lot of like New York, New Jersey, and other cars with house plants in the back coming up here. To what extent those second homes become the primary homes and the homes in the cities become the second home. Because you saw that with New Orleans post-Katrina. For those of us on the eastern part of the state, because of our proximity, because we do have the interstate and rail, we may see some of that first relative to other parts of the state. The trick is, how do we get it right? Because it can be an opportunity for Vermont. I hope that, we've, and I'd be interested to hear Adam and Bill's take on this. Hopefully we won't see our current residents who are employees get displaced by people coming in. How does that get managed? Because you could actually see a larger employee pool, which, before this event, we had actually seen employers having difficulty finding employees. And I don't know what that dynamic looks like going forward. Maybe Bill and Adam have some insight to that.
If we do see that influx of population, which could certainly be a very positive thing. What remains unknown at this point is what that available jobs kind of coming out the back end with the businesses that simply couldn't survive this hit looks like. So I think there are some uncertainties there. We have been discussing and planning, since the inception of the Southern Vermont Economic Development Zone. You'll recall the #1, that whole report led off with, the need to repopulate Southern Vermont. So, in some ways, you hate to even use the word opportunity in this particular situation, but it does feel like that might be there. And anecdotally, I was on a call last Tuesday. The Manchester real estate folks, while they're working remotely and monitoring emails, which is pretty much the limit of what they're able to do right now, are seeing a pretty significant influx, I understand, of folks reaching out from the more urban areas of the Northeast about available real estate in our region. So, I think there are too many unknowns to really start to get your hands around that yet, but I think we'll be hoping to do that soon.
What we've really been trying to understand is what is the impact of this to the available jobs in the region. So we've looked to some studies that the Brookings Institute has conducted. They've used methodologies based on some Moody's, on some Boston Group in regards to assessing risk by industry sector, and then also by business size. So if we layer that over and for our purposes so far, we've just looked at the Wyndham region, we can start to understand who's in immediate, near-term, and long-term risk by sector or by size. And so as we start to look through to the other side of this, what jobs will still be here? What's going to be different? So as you mentioned at the top of this question is, for our workforce development efforts 2 months ago, we never envisioned a scenario in which we'd have 15% unemployment. How long will that unemployment last? If there's new folks moving to the region, what skill set do they bring? So the market will enable the people to find the right jobs. People coming here will have to work for employers that have jobs that are available here, or, of course, be able to work remotely. So hopefully there'll be a balance to that where people will be able to retain their employment elsewhere if they're relocating and be a remote worker. If they choose to work here, they're going to have to work for an employer that has an available job. And really what we have to start in economic and workforce development is start thinking about what are the impacts to those jobs. As employers make it through this crisis, having to do things completely differently, they're finding ways in which to do it completely differently, and that will impact the workforce going forward. We just have to figure out how.
I agree with what everybody said, and if there are those folks who do move to our area, and there has been a little bit of historical precedent and some current waves in that direction. I like to think that those are some entrepreneurial folks too that may start working here remotely and then decide to establish a footprint with a new business in the region that can then grow and prosper. So I think a lot of the lesson that comes out of this is the importance of our local communities and our local economies, and really to try to make sure that we kind of think locally and all pull together and make sure that we're taking available of the resources that we have available.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it at that, gentlemen. I want to thank you all again very much for taking the time to be with us today. I want to thank Bill Colvin of the Bennington County Industrial Corporation, Jim Sullivan of the Bennington County Regional Commission, Chris Campany of the Wyndham Regional Commission, and Adam Grenold of the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. Thank you all for being with us today and sharing your observations and insights into this very difficult situation we're all navigating through. And hope to see you at the GNAT studio one of these days soon in person, as opposed to on Zoom. Well, we'll have to plan on that one.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.